Welcome to YogiViews, where my guest is yoga itself, through interviewing those who practice it, teach it, sell it, or simply love it. I am Antonio Saucis. Yoga's deepest quest relates to happiness and how to live a fulfilled life through spiritual realization. However, this state does not exist in absolute isolation from the world and worldly matters, and invites practitioners to develop a commanding sense of purpose, capacity, and meaning. According to the Vedas, one of yoga's inspiring scriptures, our soul has 4 distinct desires, which collectively are described as purushartha, for the purpose of the soul. My guest today wrote a book on this topic and is here to talk to us about it. He's Rod Stryker. Welcome, Rod.
Thank you, Andy.
Welcome again, I should say.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Rod Stryker is the founder of ParaYoga and the author of The 4 Desires, Creating a Life of Purpose, Happiness, Prosperity, and Freedom, and also blogs for the Huffington Post. He has taught for more than 30 years, training teachers and leading corporate seminars, yoga retreats, and workshops throughout the world. He met yoga master Kavi Yogiraj Mani Finger and his son, Yogiraj Alan Finger, whom he studied for 20 years, and is a current disciple of Pandit Rajmani Tigunait, spiritual head of the Himalayan Institute. Rod, how this topic or this book manifested for you, the idea, how did it happen in your life?
You know, it's actually based on a course I started teaching about more than 15 years ago. And at the time I found myself, I was living in Los Angeles, and I found myself, I had already been teaching for 15 years. I was teaching people who were coming to my yoga classes and my meditation classes, and I was also teaching privately some very wealthy, very successful people in Los Angeles and in Hollywood and those things. And I began to fundamental question kept coming up in my mind, which is that why is it so challenging for the people who have inner peace, say the people who are meditating and doing yoga, to find more fulfillment in the world? And why is it so challenging for many of the people who are extremely materially successful? Why are they so challenged about finding inner peace? And I began then to ask some critical questions that ultimately the answer was this course where I developed, where ultimately it spoke to those ideas. And you actually touched upon it in the introduction, where the idea that the Vedas, the ancient teachings, describe these 4 innate desires. And when we fulfill all of them, and it actually says that only the most superlative among us fulfills all of them, but it says the one who pursues, for instance, only one, so let's say material fulfillment, or let's say spiritual fulfillment, so only one of those 4 desires, is the inferior. They actually say that's an inferior person, to pursue only one. And they say the most superior person, the most excellent, the person who ultimately embodies the spirit of yoga in the most fullest sense, is the one who pursues all 4. So I designed this course, and for many years I've focused on teaching yoga in its deepest context in a way that really could access and impact people's lives. But the feedback I got after these courses, this course that I first started calling the Yoga Fulfillment, was unlike anything else I had taught. People were touched and challenged and excited and motivated and, as I said, challenged by the work in a way that asana and the other stuff I had done really didn't quite touch. So I kept teaching the course, and then over time, the idea of writing a book based on that meant a lot. That started to become a priority for me. So 7 years later, we wrote a book.
And what is the core of the idea of the book? What is the center idea?
You know, the core of it is really this, Antonio. It's that unless we ask ourselves some critical questions, we can't really expect to be fulfilled. Now, and where does yoga come into that? It comes really into play in probably the most important yogic text of all of them, most relevant to life, which is the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita doesn't take place in an ashram. It doesn't take place in heaven. It takes place on a battlefield. And what I remind people is, has your life ever felt like a battle? You know. So, and this person, this seeker, is trying to answer a critical question about how to move forward with his life. And he's facing life and death issues. Basically what yoga is for, and this is what really the gist of it, is yoga is in a sense just a methodology to help you quieten your mind so that you can answer the bigger questions of your life and answer them in a way that forces you or compels you to take the right action. You know, our destiny is not complicated. Our destiny is shaped by the decisions we make moment to moment. And if you add them up over the course of a month, 2 months, a year, 10 years, 20 years, that's your destiny, the way you made choices. And so I ask people to begin to ask themselves the critical questions. Number one is, what's my purpose? And which is not the same as profession, by the way. It's deeper. It's like, what unique ray of light or contribution, or what's your reason for being here? We know the reason for a cucumber seed. We know the reason of a tiger cub. But then what's the reason of a Mozart or a Gandhi or a Beethoven or a Leonardo da Vinci? More importantly, what's your purpose and what's my purpose? And these ancient teachings tell us that unless we answer that question and we answer it through the actions in our life, we shouldn't expect to be happy. That the real critical thing is that, answering that question. So the first thing, and unfortunately, you know, it's something that, you know, people can spend their whole life working on and they never quite find the answer to. So I've created a process, one, to find out what that is. But that's really the first major chapter in the book. And then we start moving into other pieces, which is, okay, so now that you know, now that you have some clarity, what are the next, let's say, what can you begin to manifest in your life that'll support that purpose? And the beauty of it, and I think its relevancy, why it is practical, is because it's not a book that stresses that your next step has to be, you've got to see God. It could be you've got to repair your relationship. It could be that you have to heal, that you have to change your diet, that you have to get better at more exercise. It could be that you change jobs. And it's that kind of expansiveness that includes both the spiritual and the material. That's the key, I'd say, the through line of the whole book.
And which is a very positive thing because, of course, for many serious yogis, it's all about the spiritual realm and seeking spirituality, and then we forget that we do have material needs. And when people are validated in that sense, and I think that this is something that your book does, it validates people in all their levels of what they might want, giving them proper importance to what they want, not just the spiritual goals.
You know, you make a very good point, and it's one I really try and help people understand from the get-go, which is that the very things of answering the key elements of your life at any given time may be the more critical than learning to meditate or stand on your head or sit in a quiet room with your eyes closed. And there are many anecdotes in the book, which, by the way, I resisted because the first pass of the publisher sent it back to me and said, you know, we need more stories of individuals. And it started sounding very serialized, and I was a little hesitant to do it. But as I started to do it, what I realized is, as the reader, you're on a journey with them. And I'm so used to teaching in classes. You know, in the context of class, you hear people's humanity. You hear their process.
And you can address it.
And and it makes you embrace your own humanity. It makes you embrace the fact that we're all in a process. We all are, in fact, learning to be more fully ourselves. And so what the anecdotes in the book do, which is people's stories that support each of the steps in the process, is it makes you feel like you're in a classroom. You're in a community. You're sharing your experience. You're hearing about other people, how their life and sense of self changed just through the practical changes that they made in their life, and how they began to apply what is real technology about the ancient system. You know, I'll make a point that a lot of us have heard about affirmation or positive thinking, and we kind of make this sound like some New Age deal. Well, the way it's done in the New Age is maybe New Age, but there is an ancient process for it, and it's called sankalpa.
Sankalpa. Thank God for Sankalpa.
And you know, my grand teacher went so far as to say is the first step in this process is Sankalpa. The power of your resolve.
Which interestingly enough, even though, as you very well named, affirmation is kind of the sister application of Sankalpa, I find it interesting that affirmation implies denial. Whereas resolve seems to just be much more one-pointed and decisive. And I, even from the translation of the Sanskrit term, I like it more. Now, Rod, in these 4 desires, and I think it would be good to talk a little bit about them. So the first one is Dharma, is the intention to pursue or to understand and to develop who you really are meant to be. Tell us more about this desire.
Well, from the view of the ancient teachings, it's unique among all of us, and that we're all here, we're really here to, in fact, serve or affect the greater whole of which we're a part. And that we all literally have been born with a function, according to these ancient teachings. And the way I like to put it is that we're each a note in the symphony of creation. If I hesitate to be fully myself, that instrument in this kind of grand orchestra is missing. The symphony doesn't get the same, it's not the same. If we imagine that, and in fact I go even further into the teachings where they say that each of us is born first, before we're conceived, is a mahad, means a noble or great idea. So I was a great idea, you were a great idea. And the more we can live into that great idea that brought us here, that we're meant to touch lives. We're meant to create this effect in the greater whole. And the more we do that, not only are we elevated, because it brings us core fundamental fulfillment, but the world itself is brought to a better place. And so the idea of Dharma is central to the Eastern contemplative traditions. And although Buddha broke away from much Vedic thought, this was the core of his message as well. So Dharma is fundamental. And the idea of fulfilling your purpose is the critical idea around what it means to be a fulfilled person.
Challenging issue, because finding one's purpose sometimes is the journey itself, much less than manifesting it, but even finding it. It's very hard for a lot of people. I'm sure this is something you've encountered.
No question, and that's why really in the book I walk people through a process to do it. And in short, it's about really understanding, in the end, not what you so much want to accomplish in terms of things in your life, but really what is the imprint? What do you want to have stood for? What does your efforts ultimately reflect and say about you, about your drive? And you know, very few people attain everything they want to attain, but it's the drive to attain it that really is the mark of what we're living, and ultimately the purpose we've decided, or really unconsciously, is pushing us and promoting us in our life. Yeah. So it is difficult, and that's why I really wanted to give people a clear process to do it. But once you have it, it just opens, it's like a floodgate. Everything else opens. I mean, then we have the 3 other desires. The desire of kama, which is the desire for pleasure. Excuse me, let me...
Out of that, let's go back to the second one.
Second desire is artha, thank you. That's to have the means to fulfill the purpose. And artha then generally refers to the financial wherewithal, to have the security. Your physical health is super critical. So your physical well-being, your financial capacity, but it also, in the final analysis, also relates to just having all of the tools you need. For instance, for you to fulfill your purpose, which you shared with me a little bit, which is to expand and seat yoga in a way that really impacts people's lives, one of the things that you use is this show. This is part of your artha.
Correct.
So anything we use that expressly moves us closer to fulfilling our life purpose, it could be considered artha, not just money and wealth and security. And then,
resources, we could say.
Right, resources, an excellent way to put it. And then the third one would be kama, which there's so much confusion about. It means the search or the desire for pleasure. And in Orthodox religious traditions, this really kind of starts becoming like a very, it's about sin. It's almost reduced to lust and sin. But in the Vedic tradition, if you look a little more closely outside of the orthodoxy, what you see is it's all about the search for, well, let's say for love, for sensuality, for beauty, for art, for music. And moreover, even the joy and pleasure that accomplishment gives us. And it's said in the Vedas that the drive for pleasure will move a man to cross, or a person, to cross the ocean, the wildest and most turbulent seas. So it's the desire for accomplishment and pleasure of all kinds. And then finally, and the one that usually gets most of the press in the yoga world, is the drive for spiritual fulfillment, and which is the basis of our hunger for to know God, to know ourselves, for meditation,
Moksha.
for prayer, moksha. That's right. But if we really look at them all four together, Antonio, what you really see is like, if any one of us could fulfill all four, we would have lived the most amazing life. You know, I think of great human beings, men and women, Mother Teresa and Gandhi and whomever, but not all of them fulfilled all four desires. You know, and it's not to say that we are capable of a greater life than Gandhi, but it's to say that our own version, on which we begin to include the totality of our soul and what it's here to really give us, means that we could have immeasurable impact, both internally and externally in our life. And that's very much the hope of my book. You know, that's what drives it, and the aspiration is to give people this way of moving through to be more successful in all contexts, both materially and spiritually.
Now, it is also known that the desires can lead to pain and suffering. And in fact, there's a lot of talk and written in the yoga world about how to tame your desires and how to try to be away from them. And so, what is the line here?
I know. This is really treacherous territory. The whole idea. I've written a book called The Four Desires. I'm a yoga teacher, and supposedly a shining example of what it means, and yet I'm promoting the idea of desire. And people who've been in this world of these traditions kind of do a double take, and easily to misjudge or to come to an early incorrect conclusion about it. The Buddha, who himself probably is the greatest, probably the one we think of as much as anyone else, who transcended desire. You know, he never preached the end of desire. He actually used terminology that we could equate to wholesome and unwholesome desires. Moreover, he wasn't suggesting that we not have desires. He was talking about not being attached to the outcome of our desires, not to cling to desire itself. Big difference. If I wanted to get to your show tonight, that's a desire. And I would even make the case that there's many wholesome desires. Now, what's my relationship to getting to the show? I certainly would have been disappointed. My pain and suffering would have arisen from my clinging to my desire. Not the desire. The desire is to be here, have a good conversation with you, perhaps inspire some people and move them to include more yoga in their life. But we would make the case, as Buddha did, that there are desires: the desire to meditate, the desire for more inner peace, desire to make a difference in the world, the desire to be a good parent, desire to have the financial wherewithal, to have more choice in your life. All of these desires potentially can serve our greatest, our self-interest, and moreover serve the interest of the greater world. So desire by itself is not negative. We could say that there are wholesome, helpful desires and unhelpful. That's another thing that the Upanishads say. They say that there's preya and shreya, desires that are pleasant and desires that are helpful. What I try and do in the book is really help people parse that little tricky realm. And clearly, one needs equanimity in the face of asking these questions. You know, one of the things I find most compelling about the Bhagavad Gita is it's basically asking us to look at, when we look at our life and try and decide what actions are going to be the most constructive, it says to do it with a tranquil mind. When you try and understand your life's purpose, or what's the next best desire for you to relate to, pursue, if you don't do it with a tranquil mind, chances are it'll lead to all sorts of potential difficulties. And so ultimately yoga is about making the mind more tranquil so you can live in the moment and each moment make those choices that are helpful to you as it relates to any one of the four desires. And so that's kind of, it's more or less how we answer this tricky domain of desire. It's don't try and avoid them completely. That's all but impossible. You will, if nothing else, I could try and stop you from desiring, but you're going to want to desire your next breath. You're going to want to desire sooner or later another sip of water, maybe some food. Those are all artha. Those are all the means to help you fulfill your purpose. And sooner or later, you're going to maybe want to have a little pleasure. When you go to dinner, you may seek out just a little bit of something delicious and wonderful in your food. That's kama. Ultimately, all of that, you will want to have thought your day was meaningful and you made a difference and want to go to bed at night having had something to do that was important to you. That's the drive for dharma. And then in the morning when you wake up, if you have the impulse that, oh, another day, I've got all this responsibility to tend to, if there was only way I could have more peace, which most people's alarm clock goes off and that's what they're thinking, oh man, I got to go to work. That longing is the longing for moksha, the longing for peace, the longing for lasting freedom.
In a way, this is an empowering view on the issue because the idea of not having any type of desire is somehow either unhuman or non-human, or it questions the very basic mechanisms for us humans, where desire precisely is an important part of life. Now, on the other hand, when we talk about attachment, a lot of scriptures also say that the two basic principles of success in yoga are practice and non-attachment.
Correct.
Is this where you would go to total non-attachment, or do you?
Well, yes, in an absolute sense, non-attachment is critical. But there's a middle ground here that I think is really quite critical we speak about, because very often it's assumed that if you are attached, you won't have any goals. And what I present in the book, and what is clearly the gist of the teaching that you find in the ancient wisdoms, is that your soul has desires. It has a reason for being here, and it has a longing. Try and take desire out of a 1-month-old or a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old or a 5-year-old. What about the desire for curiosity and walking and running and playing and language? Desire is innate to who we are. However, the way the soul wants, if we can use that language, the soul's desire come in a unique way, in which it's inherently full. The innate fullness of the soul is always present. It'll never be made better by any accomplishment in the world. Your soul is full and complete. And neither will it be diminished by anything you don't accomplish. Yet it has desires. Now that's something a lot of us have to kind of really wrap our minds around, which is, on the one hand, I can have longings that are authentic to my heart, to my soul, and yet my soul has no investment in the outcome of me pursuing those desires. How many things have you and I in our life pursued because we felt a longing to do it, and yet we didn't get it? Or it led to something other than what we originally wanted. In my own life, I can think of countless things.
Yeah, likewise.
Countless. And that's the way the soul is asking us to live our life, is to really hear that kind of call. And you and I have used the word sankalpa, and so we just want to throw this in before we're done tonight. The word sankalpa is what we use for resolution, resolve. The meaning, the etymology of the word is fascinating. Kalpa means the rule to be followed above all others. It's a vow. It's not like an intention or a New Year's resolution, which most people forget about 2 months later. This is the rule that will be followed above all others. There's no room for not accomplishing my sankalpa. But the word san in front of it means the highest. It actually means born from the heart. And so the idea of a sankalpa is that it's an idea or notion that rises out of the heart And we now make a commitment to live by it. We make a commitment to honor our heart's call. So in a way, our sankalpas are already in us. We came here with intention.
We just tap into them.
We tap in. And then we make the decision to serve those desires that are within our heart. If we do that, we can become an invincible force, really, and really an agent of positive change and positive effect. And really the possibility is endless of where that might take us.
Do you prioritize any of those 4 desires? If you were to say, you've mentioned before that perhaps some of these people that we can see as role models have not really accomplished all 4. If you were to go for one, what would be your number 1?
Well, the teachings themselves say that Dharma is preeminent. Everything else is fed by Dharma. And so the fact is, if I live my life purpose, that's the one that's critical. Now, I would tell you, being a yogi and fulfilling my purpose, moksha is absolutely critical to support that. I need peace of mind. I need clarity. I need freedom and the deep connection to self in order to be a great teacher. I also need the means to support my family, and I need the means to be able to reach as many students as I can. And then finally, it gives me great pleasure to watch people grow into their understanding of yoga. So there's the 4th desire. But they all rise out of that Dharma piece. I couldn't fulfill my Dharma without moksha. I couldn't fulfill it without artha or kama. But the center of the hub is in fact Dharma. And that's why it's so vital to kind of find that Dharma piece.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, I acknowledge all 4 desires, and I can also see how part of Dharma was to have you back in the show, which was an obvious desire of mine, and whatever you want to classify it. But thank you. Thank you again for coming. It was great to have you again. And I do hope to have you some other time, maybe when you write your other book.
I hope so. Or before that, please.
Or
it takes a while to write these things. Thanks, Antonio.
Thank you.
Thanks for everything you
much,
do.
Thank you.
And for having me back.
Thank you. This was Rod Stryker. Rod is an accomplished yoga teacher, the author of The 4 Desires, the topic of our show today, his book, Creating a Life of Purpose, Happiness, Prosperity, and Freedom. And he has taught for many years, more than 30 years. He's training teachers and leading corporate seminars, yoga retreats, and workshops, both in the United States and around the world. He met yoga master Kavi Yogiraj Mani Finger, who he studied with for 20 years, and is a current disciple of Pandit Rajmani Tigunait, the spiritual head of the Himalayan Institute. And above all these things and titles, Rod is a great guy and a dear friend, so we thank him for being here with us today, and I hope you like our show. And if you did and you care to let me know, shoot me an email at antonio@yogiviews.com. I hope to see you the next time.